Hi, everybody, and welcome to Cloudigy Law's Everyday IP show. We talk about intellectual property and technology issues that are making headlines. We try to talk about them in plain English, and the idea is to help you create and grow and protect your own content and creations. So on today's show, we are talking about personal brands.
Yes, so we in the Washington, D.C. area, and I think around the country, basically in the United States, are going through post-election hangover. We've been reading a lot of news coming up to November 8th, and then again, there was some surprises for many people across the country with results of our presidential election, as well as some of the Senate and House elections. So we thought it would be good to talk about our president-elect's brand and his personal brand, the Trump branding in general, and help everybody make sense of what branding means and goodwill and all of these interesting issues that have really been raised by the 2016 election period.
Yeah, you know, this is really interesting because while we have had famous people before running for office, we've never quite had a brand machine in the way that our current president-elect is in the Oval Office. So this is actually really interesting from an IP perspective, because he's not only someone that clearly understands trademark and trademark law and the value of brands, but actually has this incredible portfolio of brands. So for those of you who don't know, and I can't imagine that there are any that are, but President-elect Trump made his name really in the real estate business. So in the 1980s, and we were talking earlier, I vividly remember this because I lived in New York at the time. Trump Tower was unveiled in 1983. And then Trump went around and became famous for building these buildings and built buildings all over the place. And his name really became synonymous with luxury buildings, hotels, apartment buildings, business towers, that kind of thing. And from that time on, he really worked on his brand. He sort of became the one personal brand in that industry, and trademarked his name.
Really, right? Before anybody else was doing this personal brand in such a particular way, right? So now we have all these internet influencers that have quite valuable brands, and we're going to talk about Kim Kardashian as one example later in the show. But he really was a trailblazer when it came to developing a significant personal brand. And as you said, he started with real estate, but then he went to steaks, to wines, and a lot of other, actually the Trump airline. He went through a lot of other industries in really expanding the brand.
Right. So he was one of the first people to really become a personal brand in real estate. And then he went on to other products and services, particularly after like the early 2000s. He was in a television show called The Apprentice and really sort of became this iconic business brand, and started registering for all sorts of things. At some point, he bought a winery here in Virginia, where we're sitting now in Virginia. He bought a winery, and so now he has this whole Trump brand of wines. He changed the name of the wines at the winery to Trump brands. And so he continually has added to his portfolio, and is constantly filing new trademarks. And he actually has one, so sort of the most amusing thing to me recently when I was looking at some of this stuff is the Trumptini, which is apparently actually a drink, rum and citrus and caviar, believe it or not. And that is trademarked. So one of the things,
the name of that drink.
Yes. Yeah. So one of the things that we were talking about is actually in the DC area. If you're not from here, it's pretty typical with an inaugural week for bars and restaurants to run specials, and they name sandwiches and drinks after, incoming politicians, and, they sort of have fun with it. And I was like, oh, somebody better alert the bars that they cannot name a drink Trumptini.
Because that's trademark infringement.
Yes, don't infringe the trademarks. And really, this is the first time where you're going to be in that situation where his branding is so ubiquitous and he's filed so many trademarks that, the kinds of normal things that you do with a presidential name, you might not be able to do because you might be infringing on trademarks if you are trying to put the name Trump on pretty much anything, right? You actually have to do some diligence that you didn't have to do with President Obama or President Bush or, President Clinton, even any of our sort of modern day presidents. Right. You didn't have that issue.
So we talked about Trump wine. Let's talk about brand value a second, because he said more than once during the election cycle, in the context of talking about his taxes and his assets and how much money he's worth, that really his primary value now is in his brands, right? So when we talk about brand value, the question is, well, what does that mean? You want to talk about his licensing and how he's really developed that brand value?
Absolutely. So, and we talk about this a lot with clients too. If you develop a brand, that is a valuable asset, right? Just your brand is a valuable asset. And he is a good example of someone who really has taken that to heart. He has a powerful, well-known brand and in particular industries. And so something that he has done, you might not know this, but primarily, he no longer really builds things. He actually licenses the name Trump to buildings. So, and actually recently there were some apartment buildings in New York that have the Trump name. He doesn't own those buildings and has not owned those buildings for quite some time. He has a license agreement where they pay for the right to have the name Trump on the building. And that's actually something that happens fairly consistently. And this isn't necessarily unusual. If you have a strong enough brand, you really can make money just from licensing that brand name, right? So long as you are safeguarding quality and consistency and all of that stuff. So this is something that he has done. Now, what has been interesting, and we talk a lot about value of brand and how to understand the value of brand. There was a lot of discussion during the election about whether or not the campaign was helping or hurting his brand value. And this is particular when you have something like a personal name brand, right? This isn't a company name where you're associating it with quality of goods and services. This is a personal name that is going to be affected by the things that the person says and does. And so we have up on the screen now a tweet where there were people talking about, there was an IMF convention in Washington, D.C., and all of the luxury hotels were booked solid, except for Trump's hotel. And this was during the election.
His brand new hotel that he opened in DC, just blocks away from the White House.
Right.
Had some vacancies.
And it had vacancies and rooms were being really heavily discounted. And there was this discussion in the news about, hey, are we seeing the effects of the detriment on the brand value of the election? Like, no one wants to stay there because they don't want to be associated with what's going on right now in the campaign. Now, query whether that changes now that he's actually won election or whether it stays the same. But this is an example of when you have a personal brand that is associated with a specific person's name, what they do and say, and what happens, if they make news one way or the other, that can really impact brand value, and brand value can really, really fluctuate.
So in other words, remember in the 1980s, we started talking about this luxurious brand, a lot of gold and filigree and incredible luxury associated with the Trump properties. He often uses gold, right, as a representative color associated with the brand. So we move from that brand to the products that we talked about, the wine, the airline, things like that. And then we move into the election season. And as most everybody knows, he said some pretty controversial things that some people really liked and some people didn't really like. And so to the point about the new hotel in Washington, D.C., we've seen a lot on social media about people really not liking him as an individual and the effect that has had on the brand.
And not just his brand too, his daughter Ivanka and his wife Melania, they both also have Trump related trademark portfolios and brands in various fashion categories, and also I think in like beauty products and things like that. And this is having an impact on them too. And you're seeing news articles about people refusing to buy certain products or certain things because of this. And again, this is really unique to personal brands. So I think it might help for just a minute to stop and talk about what is a personal brand versus sort of a normal brand. So, we talk about trademark, and we actually did a podcast a while back about the ability to trademark a personal name, right? So I cannot go to the trademark office and trademark Antigone Peyton on something because it's not my name, it's hers. And she has to give me consent for me to do that. And so we talked a while back about John Oliver had a skit on his television show on HBO where he pointed out that Trump's family name when they immigrated was actually Drumpf. And he had this whole make Trump Drumpf again thing. And he actually his legal team filed a trademark application with Patent and Trademark Office. And in the context of doing that, they got a letter obviously rejecting that trademark. And so we talked a little bit about the trademark rules on when you can and can't. And basically, if it's not you can't trademark it.
A formal name.
A formal name. I think that, and there are actually, if you go look on the Trademark Office website now, there are several individuals around the country who have tried to trademark various iterations of the Trump name, both sort of during and after the election on November 8th. There's all sorts of applications. The Trademark Office is going to deny those because those are not from Trump himself or his organization. They're from individuals.
And he's got a portfolio at this point, I think, that he's developed of almost 200 marks, right, where he's really tried to fill out the portfolio. Now, and as litigious as he is, you might imagine that he's going to be carefully monitoring the portfolio as others try to encroach on his brand.
Right. And there are some exceptions, right? So if your name is Sally and you have trademarked Sally for something, you're not going to be able to prevent other people named Sally from using their own name to do stuff. You might be able to prevent them in your specific area of the market, but it gets complicated, right? So as a general matter, we try to counsel people away from personal brands
that include their name.
Because you just never know, right?
Now there are some exceptions, particularly in fashion and luxury goods, where people have been able to get past this general block against trademarking names. Ralph Lauren is a famous example. Yep. Now, of course, that's not his real name, but the fashion brand developed this distinctiveness and he put it on everything and associated with the brand. And because of all of that effort that went into marketing and developing a special fashion brand apart from the formal name, the trademark office will, in that kind of situation, allow you to develop trademark registrations and allow you to separately protect it. Yeah. But those are extraordinary situations, and most businesses and most brands don't get to that kind of level where they can actually have a formal name that becomes a separate brand that's recognized.
And so I think, it helps to look at what are the valuable famous brands, right? Generally, they are not individual names and personal brands. When you're talking about what are the top brands in the country, what are the most valuable brands, you're talking Apple, you're talking Google, you're talking things that are not someone's name, right? For the most part, you're talking about other kinds of trademarks that have acquired some distinctiveness that are known throughout the country, that are famous. And like I said, with personal brands, so much is dependent on the person and the qualities that person does and whether they're in the news. I mean, I sort of think about things like, Pee-wee's Playhouse was this kind of juggernaut, children's thing. They had a line of toys, they had all this stuff, but it was very much tied to a person. That person ends up, being in the news in a very negative way, and down goes the entire product line, right? Down goes the show, down goes the product line, down goes the toys. Your trademark is worthless, your brand is worthless because it's so associated with an individual person. Whereas, other brands, you don't really necessarily know who's behind them. I mean, Apple obviously is Steve Jobs, but it is also Apple, the entire company. And so that brand value is going to be tied up more with the quality of its products and services than it will be tied up with anything else or the actions of any individual person. So the kind of fluctuation, and certainly the kind of fluctuation that we've seen, even just yesterday, so getting back to Trump, even just yesterday, there was footage on the news of the Trump name being removed from apartment buildings in New York. And that was, people conjecture, I mean, there's sort of two sides to every story, but there is conjecture that the reason that's happening is because the brand has gotten so tarnished through the campaign that the owners of the building no longer want to have it. So yeah, here's a list of sort of the top brands: Apple, Google, Microsoft, Coca-Cola, Facebook. While they may have executives that they certainly are not personal brands. Apple is Apple, regardless of who's at the helm. Same with Google and Microsoft and Coca-Cola. I mean, Coca-Cola in particular, that brand.
It's a very old brand.
Has been around forever. And it is not associated with any one particular person. It is Coca-Cola. It is an international juggernaut of brands. And the things that affect its brand value have nothing to do with individual people and everything to do with the products
and the quality of the products and how people feel about
right. I mean, and the example, we lived through New Coke, right? Right. New Coke came out and everyone hated it, and that actually there was
not everyone.
Well, most people did.
There were some people that liked it.
There was a big decrease in brand value because of that, right? There was this just public reaction that was crazy, and Coca-Cola spent a long time rebuilding its brand value after that. They came back with Coca-Cola Classic, and slowly New Coke went away, and we just had Coca-Cola back again, right? And the brand value is back up to where it was before. And so there are examples of that.
So let's talk about what this means for everyday businesses, right? Mm-hmm. Small and medium-sized businesses that are not the Apple of the world. One of the things that is interesting when companies come to us and we start talking to businesses is helping them understand how you develop a great brand. That's and right. How you differentiate yourself from other competitors in the market. And a great way to do that is create an interesting brand and an interesting name for your products or your services that's different than everybody else, right? And there are a variety of ways that they can do that, whether they come up with the name internally or they work with branding professionals that do surveys and look at colors and think about the connotation associated with colors or certain terms. I mean, you can get really complicated mm-hmm. and do some expensive branding efforts, or you can keep it simple and just say, what speaks to us as a company, and how do we describe the value that we deliver to our customers through our products and services. So that's the way that companies can develop their own brands. And then from a trademark perspective, it's a matter of clearing those brands and making sure that other similar companies that offer similar products or services are not using the same brand or something similar, right? That's what we as trademark lawyers look at and make sure that they're not infringing or encroaching on somebody else's brand when they launch their own brand. And the reason why you do that, right, is you don't want to put a lot of time and money and effort into starting to use a brand, and then you get a not so nice letter from somebody else saying, hey, you're confusing people out in the marketplace who, have associated that or something similar with our products or services for a period of time, and we were out there before you were, so you have to stop. Right?
That's right.
That's no fun when that happens.
We've actually written several pieces on our website. If you go on our Decoding IP blog, there are several pieces on thinking through your brand and exactly this, right? Don't fall in love with the brand name until you've cleared it, because that's the worst, right? When you sort of have fallen in love with something and then you realize you can't use it. But there are, you don't have to go through a hugely expensive process, but you do have to do some due diligence. We always, like I said, sort of counseling against the personal brand. Find a name that's unique to your company. And I always think of it as this way. If you are starting out and you want to grow your business and you have big dreams of a big business resulting from your efforts, you want it to live past you, and you want it to be something that can continue on after you without sort of needing your personal brand You want it to be something that is sort of more and beyond you. So, and again, it's because you never can tell what's going to happen, and you want to have your brand have value that's independent of you, or someone who shares your name, God forbid, that like you get tarnished with someone else's problems. And you can see, like, while there are personal brands out there, Trump's a huge example, Oprah's a big example, particularly for her books and shows and things like that. There are a lot of celebrities that have sort of used their celebrity and trademarked their name with respect to certain goods and services, just based on their celebrity. The Kardashians are a really good example of that. That is, becoming a personal brand juggernaut. But for every Kim Kardashian, there are tons of other people in public life and celebrities who have not actually done that, right? There she is, Kim Kardashian. The Kardashian family and Kim Kardashian in particular have trademarked their names with respect to certain things, trying to capitalize on their sort of general fame. But again, the value of those brands is going to be entirely dependent on the public view of an individual person, right?
Right. So if she does some things that people don't like, whether it's drinking and driving or things like that, her personal brand could take a real hit, right?
That's right.
So these people who have these personal brands and have developed a lot of wealth and notoriety around the brands, as we've seen with Trump and with some other famous people who have personal brands, the brands go up and down, and the value of the brands go up and down, dependent upon what these people do. And there's a lot of pressure associated with that.
That's right.
And as you said, it's not the everyday person, right? So when you're building a business, you're really not generally building a business around a personal brand, unless you're the 1% of the 1% who's incredibly, incredibly famous.
And again, if you think about it from a business value perspective, you don't want to risk those enormous fluctuations, right? So then you look at people, Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen are a good example. When they started out, they definitely had brands that were associated with their names. But as they continued on in the fashion world, there are brand lines that if you know fashion, you sort of know that they're involved in them. But if you don't, you don't know that. And the brand names kind of stand on their own as brands in the various fashion lines. And that's a good example of people who were like, you know what, we're going to take our personality out of it, and we're going to have a brand that can maybe stand on its own without people's opinions of what we are doing personally.
We should talk about brands that have started out with value, but then the company did a major rebranding because the product no longer became popular. And I think tobacco is a great example.
Tobacco is a fantastic example. And this is what we're talking about here. We're sort of skirting around it, and we haven't, I think, used the word, but the word here is goodwill. Right. So when you are a business and you are starting out, you create brand value, and you do that through creating goodwill. And that is quality of products and services, what you're associated with. And that is kind of what builds up your brand value. And so back about, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years ago, there was all kinds of litigation over tobacco. Long-standing companies were on the hot seat, and the head of Philip Morris, or one of the people from Philip Morris, was before Congress and basically said, gave some testimony that was extremely damaging to Philip Morris. And so after this long-standing congressional hearings and litigation over tobacco and health consequences of tobacco, Philip Morris went through a rebranding. They said, you know what? We're going to jettison the name that we've had for 100 years or whatever it was, and we are going to come up with something new. And so they are now Altria. They came up with a new corporate name and a new corporate logo that couldn't be farther from, if you just look at them, like
they're very, very different.
Very, very, very different. And, if you were sort of really paying attention, you might know that Altria is in fact Philip Morris. But if you weren't really paying attention, you're just a general member of the public, you wouldn't know that. And so that was Philip Morris
it's leave the baggage behind, right? And there are lots of examples in the tobacco industry. Joe Camel came under fire for being cute. And there was a lot of lawsuits and a lot of public discussion about marketing to kids, both in the United States and abroad. And a number of these companies went through major rebranding that included getting rid of their characters, you know, the traditional rough and tough, smoky voiced Marlboro Man, Joe Camel, right? There's lots of examples in this entire industry of major rebranding where they really wanted to leave the baggage behind.
That's right. And that's what, you know, if you sort of have gotten to the point where your brand, you are just out of goodwill, right? You just rebrand. Now, that is obviously a lot easier to do if you are Philip Morris than it is if you are Trump or Kardashian or anyone who is using their personal brand, right? Once you lose value in that personal name brand, you have lost the value, right? And there is, you know, you're not going to go change your name, right? You might be able to come up with a new brand name and a new trademark and apply it to your things, but it's a lot harder to do because if you have built around a personal brand and if you are the face of the company and you are the face of the brand, you know, that's kind of it, right? That's a lot harder to do. And so when you're looking at things like, you know, and obviously we hope that none of you out there listening are the kinds of companies that need a major rebranding because of public scandal or loss of goodwill or anything like that. You know, it is something to consider when you're considering whether or not to use a personal brand or try to build a personal brand.
And we saw that Samantha likes the show and likes the content. Thanks, Samantha. We appreciate that.
Hi, Samantha.
This is a fun topic for that. So let's go back to what businesses can do now that we've talked about personal brand versus corporate brand versus product brand. You know, we deal with a lot of businesses that are service companies that might have software or other things where really, you know, they're focused on developing a great product and great support and services. And for those companies, you know, we do all kinds of IP and we always talk about patent and copyright protection for the product itself. But service is a really important aspect of the brand. So we're always discussing how they can develop brand recognition for their company through their logos, through the name of the company, the name of the product. And that's a relatively inexpensive way to start to develop this goodwill. But it's only as good as the service that they provide.
That's right.
So Comcast is one of those companies that when you're on Twitter and you're looking at who gets a lot of hashtag fail, I gotta say they come up a lot, right? And so there's this fight between Verizon and Verizon Fios and Comcast and other providers in the industry. And service is a really important aspect of what they do.
That's right.
The same thing with cellular service, right? Service is incredibly important. People don't have a whole lot of brand loyalty. You know, the products are fairly similar unless you're in certain areas where one has much better coverage than another. So service is really important to support the brand. Right?
Yeah, that's right.
When we talk about other companies, like companies that provide consulting services, again, that's another natural place where people can create brands and brand recognition relatively inexpensively as long as they do it right and they clear it, and then they can continue to develop the goodwill around those brands.
That's right. And so when we talk about protecting your IP assets, right, trademark is one of the things. Trademark your brand, something that you want to protect. And a lot of times, you know, and you'll see on our website, in our podcasts and our blog posts, we talk a lot about trademark enforcement, the legal side, right, of that branding, right? How you come up with something that's strong, that's going to get approved and registered, how you protect it. And we talk a lot about the legal aspects of this, but there is the non-legal brand protection aspects, right? And that is being careful about who the faces of your company are, you know,
being careful with social media and how people are talking about the brand, responding to people who have concerns about the quality of the service or product, right? Monitoring on social media. That's really important to continue to protect the brand.
Right. And also thinking about how, you know, is your company, you know, sort of, I always think of Motley Fool as a good example of this. There is a certain sort of jocularity, right, to that brand. And so maybe
they're the jesters,
right? So maybe the way they might respond to somebody with a little bit of humor that is all towards not only reinforcing their brand, but also giving you kind of a cohesive sense of, okay, these are really who they are. And I appreciate the authenticity of that, right? And I understand that that's going to be a response that I'm going to get from them might be different than a response I'm going to get from T. Rowe Price or someone else that has a much different aspect to their brand.
Walt Disney is another brand that I like to talk about when we're talking about the character of the brand. Mm-hmm. They have a magical That's character. Right. They want people to have a magical experience at their sites and when they're interacting with the brand. So that informs everything that they do. So really good brands who understand how to continue to develop the goodwill and brand value. To this point about cohesiveness, they understand what their brand is, whether it's magical or the Jester brand, and they carry that throughout the brand experience so that people have a consistent interaction with the company and their products and the services that they provide. And they're always giving that cohesive experience.
That's right. So it's focusing on, who are the faces of your company? Who are your brand ambassadors? Who are the people out there on the ground sort of, and are you, do you have a consistent view and application of your branding? Are your people being consistent in how they're interacting with the public? Are you being consistent with how you interact with the public and with your employees or contractors or whoever it is that you're dealing with? Because all of that goes into really keeping your brand growing in value and making it all that more protectable when we do get to the trademark enforcement side, right? And we are trying to protect your brand, that there really is something there to protect, right? And there's a lot of value there that you can articulate when you are going in enforcement, or where you're sending someone a letter that says, hey, you're diluting my brand, you're tarnishing my brand, you're infringing my trademark, that you have really that thing back up to rely on, right? And those are some of those issues. Again, we wanted to talk about this just because we're so intrigued by the fact that we have a president that actually has a trademarked personal brand, which is just so unusual.
First time, really.
And we'll see. I mean, there have been some pieces, people writing about, well, what does this mean for trademark law in general? Because he really does understand branding and trademark in a way that maybe perhaps past presidents didn't. I think the consensus is, if you look back over the course of their filing trademarks and their trademark litigation, there's nothing that says he's going to do anything different with the trademark office or support or not support any particular laws. So I don't think that there's much to talk about in that sense, but it certainly will be interesting to see whether his brand grows in value or declines in value. I think there are people of both opinions. I think right now
he's certainly going to continue. I mean, he is so integrated with his brand.
Oh yeah.
I think we are of the same mind that personal brand will continue to be there, but now it's going to be integrated with his brand as a president. So It'll be interesting to see how the brand grows and develops and changes as our president-elect moves into a different role. That's not just, the real estate mogul, billionaire, former apprentice show aficionado.
Yep.
It'll be interesting to see how the brand changes over the next 4 years.
That's right. Well, thanks for joining us. We really enjoyed bringing this to you. We're happy that you joined us. As always, you can follow us at Cloudigy Law on Twitter. You can follow us on Facebook. Obviously, if you're watching this, you did. You can check out our Decoding IP blog. We will not be with you next Thursday. We hope everyone enjoys Thanksgiving and has a wonderful time. But we will be with you the following Thursday, and definitely look forward to it. I think we're going to have kind of a special guest, so we'll see. And we'll let you know. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and you'll find out. See you not next week, the week after.
Thanks for joining us.